right, so our next talk, we have Michelle Dutro. Michelle has a master's degree that I didn't give her. And that is in coastal and marine management from the University Center of the West Fjords in Iceland. Michelle did her thesis work using passive acoustic monitoring to track whales off the coast of Iceland. And Michelle worked as an Alaska Sea Grant State Fellow with NOAA's Protected Resources Division. And that research looked at marine mammal strandings and entanglements. And Michelle has also worked with the Ocean Guardian School program to develop ocean literacy in K through 12 students. Michelle's fun fact is that she has shared an office with 2 beluga whales, which is 2 more beluga whales than I've ever shared an office with. All right, we'll give it away to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Wyatt, for that lovely introduction. Thank you to the organizers of WhaleFest and to all of you for having me and for welcoming me into this space. I'm really excited to share with you all about the Large Whale Entanglement Response Program and our network throughout the state. And like Wyatt mentioned, much of what I'll share with you today is based on work that I conducted during my position as an Alaska Sea Grant State Fellow, working with NMFS's Protected Resources Division. But I should acknowledge that my fellowship has ended, so I'm here today as a volunteer with the Large Whale Entanglement Response Program, and am no longer affiliated with Alaska Sea Grant or with NOAA Fisheries. So we're going to dive into the issue of cetacean entanglement. And one way that we get entanglement data is through hands-on entanglement response by trained and authorized responders, like we see here in the stunning drone imagery that was captured by Sean Nielsen during a response in Glacier Bay. Woo, yeah. And we're going to hear more about this response later on. But beyond the cases where our team, gets on the water and attempts to disentangle a whale, we get entanglement data from a variety of other sources: members of the public, commercial fishers, subsistence hunters, partners within our network, even tourists. And so we'll get to see, the grassroots nature of entanglement response and documentation, and what communities like the wonderful community here in Sitka can do to help our whales. I'll give just a quick overview of what we'll cover today. I'll give a little bit about my background and how I got involved. We'll learn about what entanglement means for whales and how it impacts them. We'll look at NOAA's Entanglement Response Network to get a sense of how things are structured. And we'll learn about how common entanglement is and what different species are the most impacted in Alaskan waters. And we'll dive into a few species and entangling material identification techniques and look at some case studies where we'll get to feel like we're on the response vessel with our responders as we attempt to help out some whales. So a little about my background. My path has not been linear, and the more that I talk to others in this field, the more I learn that most people, it turns out, I think, don't have a particularly linear path, and that's probably a good thing. I earned my bachelor's degree in journalism, which has provided me with a great foundation in science communication that has been really instrumental to my career as a naturalist and aspiring biologist. I leaned heavily on these skills as I traveled for many years as a wilderness guide, which eventually led me here to Alaska. And then when COVID shut down tourism, I pivoted and started working with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, studying salmon on the Stikine River. And this work really got me interested in how our marine resources are managed. And so I decided to go back to school 7 years after my undergraduate degree to earn my master's in coastal and marine management at a university in Iceland. And while I was there, I was fortunate to study a wide array of topics: the foraging ecology of Icelandic killer whales, the acoustics of northern bottlenose whales, and as Wyatt mentioned, share an office space with a couple of beluga. You can see one of them in the upper left there. But I first heard about NOAA's Entanglement Response Program in 2017, when the guide company that I worked for experienced a really unfortunate interaction just outside Tracy Arm. A humpback whale became entangled in their anchor chain, and the chain was wrapped around a pectoral fin, and then as the whale turned, it became wrapped around the head and the lower jaw. I wasn't actually on board at the time, but you might recognize actually a face here in the audience. Mike Justa is here today with some students. There he is working on a sandwich. So pretty fun that some people in this room were actually involved with this kind of start to my involvement. It's really fun. But I heard about this response from my coworkers, and I was fascinated to learn more about this program and the training involved to do this work. But never in a million years did I think that this was something that I could be involved with until my fellowship through Alaska Sea Grant brought me into the fold. So for the past 2 years, I've served as the large whale entanglement data manager for the Alaska region. I've attended and presented at several response trainings throughout Southeast, coordinated and conducted response, and investigated trends by summarizing report data on various species. I won't leave you hanging with this story, though. This whale was released. The anchor chain was cut very carefully by our team of trained and authorized responders, and the whale did swim away, but the outcome for this animal was unknown. You can see in the image here of the chain wrapped around that lower jaw. This was a serious injury that may have resulted in the death of the animal, despite the best efforts of the response team and the crew. So this brings me to kind of our first entanglement topic. What does entanglement mean for whales, and what are some of the impacts that we see to them? And I do want to issue a quick trigger warning. We are going to be talking about stressed and injured whales, and we may see some images that may be distressing to some people. So entanglement often means physical trauma, right? These lines can become embedded over time, and as the whale moves, these can progress to quite a severe stage. You may have heard of the case of a humpback whale that was still alive despite having a completely severed fluke down in the Salish Sea. It's not expected for a whale to survive an injury like this, but there is documentation of a few cases. There was a fin whale in the Mediterranean that was recited over several years with a completely amputated fluke. So it does really highlight just how resilient these animals are. In some cases, health deterioration may be the first sign that a whale is entangled. They can develop light-colored skin, giving them this sickly appearance, and their bodies may be covered in whale lice. If you were paying attention at Marin Trivia last night, you might know these are called cyamids. And some cyamid load is normal for most whales, but such large number of cyamids like we see on this gray whale here indicate a really significant health deterioration. Whale lice, they feed on algae that settles on the host's body, as well as on sloughing skin. And so with lots of skin sloughing off an unhealthy animal, there's more food to support a larger community of lice. This is a North Atlantic right whale. Initially, the thought was that the entanglement wasn't particularly severe, but this whale had line wrapped around its pectoral fin. And just like Kim talked about yesterday in her pinniped entanglement talk, this whale did, kind of grew into this entanglement. As it grew, it got more and more constricted. And that eventually led to systemic infection, which caused the death of the animal. Some whales can also asphyxiate. Often they're strong enough to move the gear and reach the surface to breathe, but they can become entrapped in netting, like this calf that washed up on Douglas Island near Juneau. And this is a particularly common outcome for smaller cetaceans like harbor porpoise. Entanglement can also make whales more vulnerable to other threats, right? These things can be additive. In this case, I'm talking about ship strike. Entangled whales, they typically spend more time at the surface, they're less maneuverable, and so they become more at risk. We see with this entangled humpback, there's those parallel lacerations that are consistent with a propeller strike. And in this case, the injury has become kind of a sticky point for debris to catch on. So entanglement can be a precursor to vessel strike, or the injuries from the vessel interactions can increase entanglement risk. So it can work both ways. Whales dragging gear can also become magnets for additional entangling material. Paul Cottrell's entanglement response team with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada responded to this entangled whale off the coast of British Columbia last year. They made more than 50 rope cuts to eventually free this whale. It was entangled in gear from multiple fisheries along the west coast, and some of this is believed to be Alaskan pot gear. So all the gear you see laid out there, that all came from one whale. One of the biggest impacts, though, is starvation. With that lost maneuverability, we do see reduced foraging success. We know from their fasting during migration that whales can go months without eating, but they will eventually starve. We can see here on this whale, the scapula, the vertebrae and the skull are showing. Those are all signs of a skinny whale. And in this case, the body condition tells us that this is not a recent entanglement, right? This whale has been dragging this gear for a prolonged period of time. And along with duration of entanglements, whales can drag them for significant distances as well. This represents the longest known distance traveled by an entangled whale. This was a humpback that traveled an estimated 4,700 nautical miles. And we do see this happen annually with whales migrating to Hawaii as well. This is where we get a sense of possible population level impacts that entanglement can pose. So not only is dragging gear from this distance going to impact body condition, survivability, entanglements can also impact reproductive success as these whales make their way to their mating grounds. We see here too a nice representation of the challenges to management that we have. These animals pass through so many fisheries areas, so many urban and industrial areas, and this can make it really difficult to determine the source of the materials involved. Just to give a quick kind of overview of our program and how things are managed, it all starts with NOAA Fisheries, right, our federal regulating agency. And within NOAA Fisheries is the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program, which responds to and documents reports of sick, injured, stranded, and entangled marine mammals. And this program is mandated under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Keep it strong. Then we have the National Marine Mammal Entanglement Response Network, and every coastal state has contributing partners who are permitted and supported by NOAA. And then, of course, within that, we have our regional network, which here in Alaska is comprised of local, tribal, state, and federal partners who all collaborate to conduct response to entangled mammals. And these are just some of our contributors in Alaska. So you can see that the effort involves just so many communities, both nationally and at the state and local levels. In the past years, Ed Lyman, who unfortunately couldn't join us today with the Hawaiian Island Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, has traveled up to Alaska to provide entanglement response trainings all over Southeast and further north. And these trainings are provided to organizations within our network, like the University of Alaska Southeast here in Sitka, and also to local fishers, community members. So this really is a grassroots effort that relies heavily on entry-level responders to report entanglements and to provide that initial documentation to our response teams. And one of the main ways that we get reports is through our stranding and entanglement hotline. This has been mentioned by others this weekend. It's one of the main ways we get the reports, and I'll reference this throughout the presentation. So anyone can dial this number to reach an answering service, which will connect you with a member of our response team. So for many people, when we talk about entanglement, their first question is, okay, how often do whales get entangled? How big of an issue is this really? And the short answer is, we don't fully know. And a large part of the reason for that is because observations of entanglements are inherently opportunistic. And in a state as massive as Alaska, with populations of people spread out all across it, our chances that someone happens to see an entangled whale and then report it are fairly low. We do have a significant body of research looking at the scars on whales that are left by previous entanglement. And that does provide us some good information into the frequency with which this happens. A 2007 study by Janet Nielsen and her co-authors estimated that up to 78% of whales assessed in the northern part of Southeast Alaska had been non-lethally entangled at some time in their lives. And this tells us that, first of all, whales do often self-release without human intervention, right? It also tells us that we are just scraping the surface of understanding the impacts of this stressor because it's happening all the time, and we often only know about the survivors, right? Scar studies do not really tell us much about how many whales die from entanglements and are never observed or reported. So when we talk about the number of entanglements we see in Alaska, all we know for sure is that the reports we receive reveal just the tip of the iceberg. And that means that each and every report, no matter how detailed or how well documented it is extremely valuable to our understanding of this stressor. And that's what I'd like to focus on today, the value of each and every report and how that data can be used to help us develop a deeper understanding and how communities may come together to help develop mitigation and solutions. So we'll get a little bit of data. Here we can see the last 10 years of entanglement reports in Alaska. And this includes just large whales, so in this case, only baleen whales and sperm whales, so this is not an exhaustive look. But of the large whales, overwhelmingly, the most commonly entangled species are humpback whales, which are represented here in green. In the last 10 years, Alaska has seen 106 confirmed humpback whale entanglements. Another common species are gray whales, represented in yellow. We tend to see gray whale entanglements occur further north, but we did have one reported near Angoon in 2022. And then we also see quite a few whales that can't be identified to the species level. These are represented in blue, these unidentified cetaceans. And this often occurs when, we receive a report, with a photo showing an entangled whale, but maybe there just isn't enough information there to identify the species. And the detective work that can happen at that species ID stage can really be quite remarkable. This 2024 case offers a great example. We received a report from the US Coast Guard of a dead floating whale about 50 miles northwest of Point Hope. And I'll be the second today to give a shout out to the Coast Guard, but this is a really remote area, very few eyes on the water. And without this report, we would have no record of this entanglement. So really, truly grateful for our partnership with the Coast Guard. You can barely see a line entangling this animal. And as you can see by what remains of the carcass, we really don't have much to go on here in terms of species ID. There's very little even showing above the surface of the water. But if we are detectives, then our secret agents are these glaucous skulls that are perched on the carcass, and they give us a sense of scale that is really the key to helping to identify the species in this case. So we have a mix of adult and juvenile glaucous skulls, and kind of thinking about the average size of these gulls, we noticed that the remaining skin layer, that black little patch of skin there, looks quite thick. And it looks about as thick as the black tip of the beak of a juvenile glaucous skull. And so after consulting with bird experts, we estimated that the black tip of a juvenile's beak was about 1/2 inch or perhaps 3/4 of an inch long, which then when compared to skin thickness, that's quite thick, right? A bowhead whale just happens to have some of the thickest skin of any mammal. It can be about 1 inch, just under 1 inch thick. But what really drove home this determination is that the skin thickness of all other cetaceans is about 1/4 of an inch or less. And so this tells us that skin of this thickness could only be that of a bowhead whale. So some really interesting analysis on this case. We were able to bring in, bird experts, bowhead whale species experts, a veterinarian, as well as our internal response team to kind of piece together. And we often do phone a friend for these determinations. So it is cool to see how the research community comes together to put these puzzle pieces together. Of course, species ID is just one of the questions that comes up here. What type of entangling material involved is another question. And with such limited information, all we can really say is this is unidentified line. It's hard to get more specific. This could be deck line. There's no way to know or to tie this to a fishery or anything like that. And this uncertainty with material type, this happens really frequently and is one of the main challenges of entanglement documentation and management. This case of a Cook Inlet beluga whale that was entangled is another good example of this. This whale was reported in Kinnick Arm in 2024 with what looks like possibly a tire liner wrapped around the mid-body. This could not be confirmed. We still don't know what that is. If anyone recognizes it and thinks they have an idea, please share. And I want to reemphasize with this here that, when we're talking about entanglement, we're not just talking about fishing gear, right? We've heard from Kim and from Christina about all of the types of marine debris and the ways that it enters our environment, in addition to fishing gear. And so that's why I'm careful to say entangling materials, right, instead of gear, unless we know in specific instance that entanglement is in fact derived from fishing gear. Another great example of kind of putting all of the puzzle pieces together came with this 2023 report. This came in as a hotline call and they were able, some people on a cruise outside of Kenai Fjords, oops, and they were able to send us this video. The sound isn't really important on this one, but we see some buoys. We don't see a whale, but we see these buoys kind of clustered closely together and behaving, moving kind of strangely. So this was the extent of the report we received, and they believed that it was an entangled gray whale. So we notified our partners in the area, and the Alaska Sea Life Center sent out a notice to mariners, but this animal unfortunately was not recited. It was kind of lost in the ether. Then over a month later, in July, our partners with the Sunak tribe of Kodiak came across this carcass during an aerial survey. And our experts were able to match the gear that we saw in that video with the gear entangling this carcass. And were able to determine this is the same whale. So typically a mobile whale is like a needle in a haystack, right? Resites are quite uncommon. But this case offers a rare opportunity for us to connect the dots and learn the outcomes of entanglement for this whale, however unfortunate that it was. And that was really only possible because of the documentation that we received from those hotline callers. So from that initial sighting location to the location of the whale's death, we knew that the animal had traveled at least 250 miles while entangled. But determining where the gear came from would allow much deeper insight. And so the best case scenario here would be to recover all of these buoys, to find any registration numbers on them, and then contact those fishers so that they could confirm the fishery, when the gear was set, where the gear was set, when it was lost, elements like this. And that would help us understand how long the animal had been entangled for, how long it had traveled. Unfortunately, in this case, bear activity kept our partners on Kodiak from being able to land safely to access the carcass or recover the gear. And the numbers on the bullet buoys were no longer legible because they had been used as chew toys by the bears. So we had to make our determinations just based on this and a couple other photos. And so we consulted with some experts at NOAA and Fish and Game, and due to the number of bullet buoys present on the carcass, this indicated that the whale was entangled in multiple sets of pot gear associated with multiple pot fisheries along the west coast. So the best we could do was categorize this as unidentified pot gear. And for gray whales, pot gear is one of the most common sources of entangling material. We conducted a recent review of 34 years of entanglement report data in Alaska and found that gillnet and pot gear were the most common materials entangling gray whales. And this makes a lot of sense, as gray whales, we know them to feed and migrate through the near shore, where they experience a lot of overlap, both in space and in time, with many different commercial and recreational fisheries throughout that migratory corridor. And because they tend to travel closer to shore as they move northward, they may be more susceptible to entanglement during the spring migration than they are during the fall and winter. We also conducted this review with bowhead whales, and our findings are supported by the existing research and literature showing that these whales are primarily entangled in commercial pot gear set in the Bering Sea. While with sperm whales, it's likely unsurprising to this audience, sperm whales were most frequently entangled in commercial Gulf of Alaska longline targeting sablefish. But we're starting to see a really exciting shift in sperm whale entanglement, and that's because of the efforts of commercial fishers and researchers who have come together to find solutions to this issue. And this offers a really strong example of how communities can come together to make a difference both for people and for whales. So many here are likely familiar with the concept of depredation, the removal of caught fish before it has been brought on board. And this behavior has been observed worldwide, involving several different fish and cetacean species. In the Gulf of Alaska, we see these interactions mainly between sperm whales and commercial sablefish longliners. And this issue has been ongoing for decades. Documentation of these interactions really started ramping up in the late 90s. But this behavior is, of course, it's dangerous for the whales who can become entangled in that longline gear, and it's dangerous and financially costly for fishers. In 2015, the depredation of sablefish was estimated to result in an economic loss of over $1,000 per set when sperm whales were present within 500 meters of the vessel. And this research is all based on work done here in Sitka with CSWAP, the Southeast Alaska Sperm Whale Avoidance Project under Jan Straley. So to combat this issues, fishers and researchers came together to develop a gear modification that was specifically designed to catch sablefish in a way that would protect the catch from depredating sperm whales, as well as from killer whales. Now 85% of sablefish quota is fished using pot gear that's known as slinky pots. And this gear modification, it seems to be greatly reducing depredation interactions, and subsequently we expect to see fewer sperm whale entanglements as well. This is just one way that the fishing community has come together to find creative solutions. And in entanglement response, we benefit from a lot of community involvement, and especially in small and remote communities where resources might be limited. This case in Dutch Harbor in 2024 offers a great example of this. This is on the morning of April 1st. We got a hotline report from our partners with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game that a whale was anchored in the bay right in front of town in Dutch Harbor. And we did wonder if this was an April Fool's prank. So it's April 1st. It was not. Asia Veeder and Ethan Nichols with Fish and Game have received some entanglement training, and they were authorized by NOAA to conduct a close approach with a pole-mounted GoPro so that the entanglement could be assessed and they could collect underwater footage, giving a better sense of the configuration of the entanglement. An assessment and documentation is always the first step to any response. So what they found was a humpback whale that was anchored in place with line running through the mouth and then wrapping multiple times around the tailstock and descending straight down to the seafloor. This animal was stressed out. It was also a young whale. It was estimated about 2 years old, which makes it quite unpredictable in its behavior. Not only was this whale carrying a life-threatening entanglement, it was also anchored in place right next to a busy shipping lane. So we can see the whale represented by this red star, and then the shipping lane runs just to the right of it. So we were fortunate to work with the Coast Guard to send out a notice to mariners, and also with Marine Exchange that labeled this whale as a navigational hazard so that anyone with AIS could see this whale, which is just a fantastic use of resources. It took a couple days for our team to arrive. Ed Lyman flew all the way from Hawaii, and Sadie Wright came from Juneau to attempt to disentangle this whale. And because the water visibility was so clear, they were able to successfully use what's called an exoscope. And so Ed is holding this long black pole that we can see reaching out over the bow. And on the end of the pole is a knife that's specifically designed for entanglement response, as well as a camera. And that camera is patching a live feed to this handheld device that Sadie is holding. And this is the first time that this exoscope had been successfully used in a response effort. So this is a high-tech moment that hadn't been used before. So it was very exciting. So Sadie can actually see where the cutting tool is in the water in relation to the whale, and she can help direct Ed's cuts. So we'll go ahead and watch this little video.
Yeah, you're on, I think, boy, maybe we can see, maybe if we let it drift off on this side, maybe we can port side approach. What do we got now?
So they're slowly.
Okay, yeah, it's still heavy on the nose. He's out there facing us. So he almost like, yeah. Oh, good. Okay, good. You can do that.
So we can hear his communication with his helmsman. There are the whales at the surface. Now he's getting that knife in place so he can feel the resistance from the line he's trying to cut.
Anything? Am I on it? Can't see. Okay. Come on. Okay. Okay. One cut. One cut, man. Now we want to reverse slowly. Because one cut's right. You gotta cut. Yeah.
Just love Sadie's smile in that. So pretty incredible that she could watch that cut, confirm that the cut had been made. And it looks easy, but a lot of assessment goes into this decision, right? They aren't just approaching and cutting any line that they can grab onto. They're reviewing footage beforehand. They're often using models of whales to recreate the entanglement so they can make an informed and strategic decision based on how the gear is likely to shift after each cut. This animal was freed with just a small amount of line remaining through the mouth. And this brought together personnel with NOAA, with Fish and Game, the Coast Guard, Marine Exchange, community members. Like, I'll never forget Josie, she was a ranger with the Wildlife Refuge, and she and I were texting feverishly because she could, from her job as the Wildlife Refuge, she could actually see the whale from all of her different workstations. And so she recorded the respirations and the time that the whale was spending at the surface throughout the day, which we could then provide to the responders when they arrived. And that was just really excellent information. We worked with a local drone operator with the city of Unalaska who was licensed and able to be authorized by NOAA for close approach. And the whole town was just deeply invested in this response. And it's a really great example of how communities can come together and help whales. Another case study, this is the response in Glacier Bay that I had on my title slide. This was in 2023, and this offers another great example of community readiness. Local residents reported the entanglement through the hotline, and then they stayed and they monitored that animal. And that is a really huge piece. Oftentimes, people aren't able to stay or they lose sight of the whale and then we aren't able to recite it. So the fact that they stayed there, they continued to monitor until our team could arrive, really should be the gold standard. So you can see here we have Fred Sharp on the bow with Alaska Whale Foundation, Dr. Christine Gabriel in the middle, and Janet Nielsen on the helm, both with the Glacier Bay Humpback Whale Monitoring Program. So they were able to get on the water to assess this entanglement within hours, which is truly incredible. And this was a difficult response. Much like the Dutch Harbor example, this whale was hogtied. It had line running through the mouth and then wrapped around the tail stalk. And it was also anchored in place. So I'm going to skip ahead because this is a really long video. The numbers are so small on my screen. Hold on. Bear with me. Sorry, it's hard to find on this little screen. Here we go. Awesome. So in this case, the line was tight enough that the whale was forced to swim in these clockwise circles, which made the approach really challenging. Typically, you don't want to approach from behind the whale, but they were forced to do so in this case. So you can see Fred reaching out with that pole-mounted knife. He's managed to get on the gear and has made a cut. And now their concern is that that trailing gear is coming really close to their prop, right? Normally you would lift that propeller out of the water, but they're unable to do so because they need to stay underway in order to get close enough for that cut. So this was a dangerous and technical response. They make it look pretty easy though. Here's another view, this time from Fred's helmet cam.
Got another cut?
Good job. Watch his buoy, watch his buoy, watch his buoy. Nice.
And again, at the end there, Janet's worried about that gear getting too close to that propeller. So after making several cuts like this, the team was able to free this whale, which swam away with just a section of line through the mouth. This whale dove and it booked it out of there, and everyone was left wondering if we would see this whale again. It was entangled for a pretty short period of time, just a couple days, but the entanglement was quite severe, right? You could see how its spine was curved and it was forced to spin in these circles, which may have caused serious injury. So we waited for the whale to be sighted that winter in Hawaii or possibly in Mexico, but no sightings were reported. The next summer, we hope to see the whale return to the waters of Glacier Bay or somewhere else in Alaska. But then another winter passed with no sighting. And then finally, In July of 2025, we got a very happy email from Janet Nielsen announcing that this whale, Southeast Alaska 5490, had been resighted by the humpback whale monitoring program. So two years after the entanglement response. So we were all thrilled by this outcome and just so grateful to the monitoring program for their work. Without these surveys, we were unlikely to have known the outcome for this whale. We're also thankful for the incredible resource that is the website Happy Whale. This is the program for the profile for Southeast Alaska 5490 on Happy Whale. You can see the report of the entanglement and the response is here, and then here is the most recent sighting when it was resighted in 2025. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this site. We've talked about it a few times this weekend and on our marine wildlife cruise. And it's similar to the website that Chloe Kotick talked about specifically for orca whales, FinWave. And this is particularly popular for humpback whales. It uses citizen science to gather whale sighting data from all over the world. And if you're able to collect Fuke photos while you're out on the water and you can submit them to Happy Whale, it's a simple thing to do, but the impacts have truly revolutionized whale research. Happy Whale now represents a collaborative and nearly comprehensive humpback whale photo ID database for the North Pacific. And this enables population modeling, it reveals social interactions, movement patterns, and reproductive rates. And it also allows researchers to track individuals over time, which is really helpful for monitoring entangled whales and understanding survivability. So you never know, a photo that you take of a whale could be the sighting that we've been waiting for to confirm that a whale that's been disentangled has survived. So yet another way that communities can come together to help our whales. If you're interested in learning more about entanglement reporting, documentation, and response, and especially if you were unable to attend the awesome workshop on Saturday with Stacy Golden, John Moran, and Steve Lewis, we have a free 1-hour virtual training that's available to anyone and who wants to get more involved. And so completing this training, and there is a quick quiz, that will get you into our network list so that we can better collaborate with you in the future. You can also feel free to save this number into your contacts. This is the Alaska Region's 24-hour stranding and entanglement hotline, which can be used to report any stranded or entangled animal. And just to give you kind of a few quick things to use as a guide rail, if you do ever come across an entangled animal, the first thing always is to ensure your own safety. We never recommend approaching a whale, and in fact, we do recommend giving more than that regulated 100 yards distance. And the reason for that is well illustrated by this photo. These whales can have gear trailing for sometimes hundreds of feet behind them. And oftentimes that's hard to see when you're down on the water. So we do recommend giving quite a bit of distance. These are also, stressed whales, so extra space is always going to be helpful for them. We do appreciate any and all photo and video documentation taken from that safe distance, even if it's like a blurry video on your phone. You can see from that bowhead species ID process, sometimes we can glean a lot of information from just any documentation at all. And then, of course, please call the hotline as soon as you can. If you're not in cell service, you can connect with the Coast Guard to relay the report on channel 16. So thank you all so much, and a huge thank you to everyone who contributed data and documentation and their response efforts that we've highlighted here. If you're interested in learning more about the Entanglement Response website, there's a QR code there. We have numerous web stories and videos available online if you want to get more information. So feel free to raise a fin with any questions.